I think you said that. Okay, when the game master ask what do, you look at at your character sheet. If you don't, that's one of the solution to that questions.
Well, yes, I think that's true, but I'm not sure that that's very relevant. You can, or you may not do that. But in this game, nothing on the character sheet has to do, at least we don't know yet.
No.
We don't know what those have to do with roles. And I know because of what we've talked about, I didn't think about it during play, but I know that when we put those words down,
Yeah.
that those are relevant for use
Mm.
in our dice rolls. But
Mm.
the other players don't really know that yet. But but you don't have to have those. You can do dice rolls even if you don't have some such feature either. So I think that we will benefit. I If it's okay with you, I and the reason I'm asking is because in your vision of the game, do you see players rather than the game master basically, slapping their hand on the table and saying,
Let's roll.
it's a roll,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I definitely see that.
In that
I,
case, I'm going to start taking that position during our next session.
yeah, do
And
that.
I'm probably going to give Max and Elma a sharp elbow, and say, let's do this.
I really appreciate that reminder. I will not at all be disturbed for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I will be much more. I think it was more or less something that usually happens in this phase during play, but I was not. I was actually only prepared for the.
Right.
I was more or less prepared for the prologue and really first scene.
Right.
Where we kind of ended in a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Because I had all my kids sleeping and all that.
No problem. Yeah.
But I think it's a really that was the reason I was talking about technique, because sometimes you can, the live role playing game, they are really much about technique, because you don't have a game master and you have to rely on everyone having different techniques, and a lot of like the free form culture in Sweden are talking a lot about techniques. And I at first I was really annoyed by that, because that was, we cannot have a good play session just relying that everyone is a good role playing.
Well, also, I think it's worse than that. I think okay, first of all, my views on this are fairly severe.
Yeah.
Which is that when people say we are free form, we don't have these rules.
Yeah.
They're full of shit.
But we don't have to go away. You and I totally agree on that. But what I've seen is that you can transcend or kind of move techniques into the system. And you can, especially for the game master, you can say that this is usually a technique for me as a game master, but you can make it, you can transfer that and say,
you can distribute.
You are supposed. You can say that you're supposed to do this in the first session, and then it's not the technique. Then it's a process that you should follow, or you should kind of
be aware of it as an available thing.
It doesn't need to be a rule, but it can be more of a kind of a heuristic or a thumb rule or a guideline.
Well, the terminology for these is difficult in this hobby, but so we can discuss that later. But I agree with what you mean quite a bit.
And I think that is what I'm taking with me here. And each session comes out and I say, okay, I was doing this and it felt good. Let's put that into and move that down to more of a procedure or something that should be
Right.
a part of the
Right.
system.
Or at least
Uh,
textually present to be a principle in mind, as we say.
yeah,
Right.
when it comes to players and playing a game, I think we have there is a couple of interesting techniques that you can use as a player to make stories more interesting.
Oh, well, I completely agree. And I think that one of them has to do with seeking conflict rather than waiting
Yes.
for it. Another one has to do, and the way my character seeks conflict, my characters in general seek conflict,
Yeah.
is exactly what you were talking about. I don't seek
Yeah.
conflict necessarily by jumping in and being a pain in the ass to everybody. I
No.
seek conflict by having my character do things that make other people at the table get excited about making a conflict, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and that's fine. I mean, and I'm happy to jump into it when it comes to me as well. So the thing I'm trying to say is this: we can turn to a lot of different ideas about what makes stories engaging. And I have my own ideas about this. And I think that it is far more specific than vague things like, well, we want to see how it turns out, or I just like the feeling of it all making sense as we go, or all these kind of vague things. I'm far more interested in what makes me, as either a creator or an audience member, demand demand my attention to it. The kind of content where I have no choice. I am going to be interested. I want to see, I want to, as a creator, make it go. As an audience member, I want to see. And there are specific kinds of situations that command our attention for this. And the reason that we're interested in something like the Weird West is not because we just like that comic and want to just make a fanfic version of the comic. It's because it has inherent situations that we find demanding. They demand our attention, they demand our resolution, they demand our participation. And the Weird West has its own range of things which demands this. And that's what your cards are all about,
Mm.
right? This is that's what your cards do. And you have shaped them through many playtests and many, hours of thought into a set of compelling uh, personal, you know, uh, opportunities, really. And so I think that therefore you can trust them. You can say, all right, we have them in play. It's You can never guarantee that somebody will use them to the fullest. But let's not forget that different players can use their personal techniques, as you're calling technique,
Mm.
very differently. You can have the one who
We,
likes
we,
to,
we can call them playing techniques because
yeah,
then
yeah,
we
yeah.
kind of
Well,
separate
the
them
idea is
from.
that you have players who are very content to kind of bump along and just ride the waves
Mm.
and bump along. Oh, what are we doing? Oh, what's going on? Oh,
Reacting
right.
like
Very reactive, but not and never even really reacting very strongly. You can
mm.
get those players, and sometimes you find that with that player present, it helps everybody else to remain attentive. The player is never doing anything outrageous with that particular character, but the way they talk and the way they listen sets a great model for everybody else. I call that
Mm.
player the drummer,
Mm.
right? They
Mm.
just keep drumming, right? They just keep going, and we're going to take kind of a stereotypical drummer, not a flashy one or a solo drummer. but a kind of stereotypical drummer who is just basically
keeping the pace.
keeping the beat. And you know
Yeah.
what? It's nice to have a guy like that at
Mm.
the table. There's nothing wrong with it, and they're not retreating from conflict. They never really try to get out of play. In fact, with them they're always, maybe it's just their ongoing comments, their emotional comments about what other people are doing. And with them there, the group is far more cohesive.
Mm.
And so there's lots of ways for a player's technique to be involved and very constructive without simply being a crazy conflict man, right? A constant conflict man.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is nice. I think your cards and your setup have done an immense amount of constructive work for you to let us now play and use them. And so let's see how that goes next time.
Hopefully, we will play through phase 1.
Right.
That means that session 2 of 3, the session after this one, will involve one of you choosing the next card, and that is for everyone extremely, like, it's a strong moment to choose. Okay, what is the center of this conflict?
Right. I completely agree. And that's,
yeah.
I completely agree. And so therefore I'm very much looking forward to the role of the dice and the resolutions during phase 1.
Yeah.
That's right.
That there will be that. So, and I'm not afraid of using that part at all, although it's a bit flawed. But can I, just before we can collapse in tiredness and all of that, when I specifically thought about technique, I was watching one episode of a TV series called The Good Place, if you know what that is. And in that series, this was like season 3, but it was in season 3 that I realized that they, as a script writer, they created something that I understood that I sometimes used with a lot of success, or like narrative success, that it made a lot of impact. And that was like 2 characters that either during the episode or during like a story arc, being in a great conflict with each other, suddenly one of the characters came to the conclusion about the problem about their relationship. And the thing that I thought was really interesting was that the way I have seen it before in a lot of like films, stories, movies, books, whatever, that the resolution of that problem was always like fluffed out with a lot of like poetry and subtle motions. But in this series, it's so extremely compact. So it's basically you and I talking to each other, and I say, okay, Ron, what I now realize is that you have always been my friend, but I thought you were my enemy. And every time, in every kind of resolution in that particular series, it kind of, in a totally non-poetic and a kind of recipe way, one of the characters explained how they saw the reality and how they felt that they have kind of solved the problem, and the other character said yes, and I was really surprised as a viewer that I totally fell for it.
Right.
Because it was so clear and so obvious. You didn't use all this fluff.
Right. Right.
They kind of just
Right.
gave me the I thought you were my enemy, but you're my friend.
Right.
And just saying that straight up
Right.
was so. And it was almost
Right.
got
No, I completely agree.
goosebumps.
It's quite nice when there's a certain what is the word I want? A certain relief I feel when they don't try to dress it up as, and here it is so important, and here it is so, so sentimental, right? Right.
Yeah, and it's also, all these you kind of we're trying to, you're caught in the show don't tell,
Right.
and the show don't tell is good. I think it's
Show don't
good.
tell is overrated.
Yeah,
But
but it's really
overrated.
really
It's
hard.
a way to do things,
Yeah.
and there's also confirmation bias involved, because I started paying attention to all of the old movies, because they say watch the old movies. They show, they don't tell. Bullshit. They tell all the time. I mean, think
Yeah.
of all the times when they have the newspaper spin at you and stop so you can read the headline. I mean, that's
Exactly.
telling, right? Stuff like
Yeah.
that. Or characters who just deliver a 1-minute monologue about what's going on.
In prime time, I think I deliberately used that technique when I think it was one scene where I said, I'm so honored that you approaching me with this.
Mm-hmm.
And I, instead of like trying to show don't tell the honor, I told exactly the exact motion,
Right.
because we don't have time for
Right.
that kind of like, that was my end technique rant. Or
good enough. It makes a lot of sense. Take care.
Take care. Bye.